welcome to anyone who has joined already. Just while we're waiting for a few more participants to join, I want to remind you to feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat. You let us know, are you a startup? Are you just an individual exploring entrepreneurship? Are you a scientist? You can maybe also explain what you're hoping to learn here today. Are you getting inspired? Are you getting reassured because it's a crazy time? Are you here to learn a few tricks? Or maybe is this just a moment for you to get connected in this world where we're all disconnected right now? Please just don't hesitate to sign into the chat. So we're going to give it just a few more minutes before we get started. We actually ran a panel last week, and we had a bunch of scientific entrepreneurs who were on the panel. And what was super interesting is everyone was on the call within the first minute of the call. So we started straight away. There was no gap. I don't know, what does that tell us about scientific entrepreneurs? Punctuality, precision, I don't know. Do you find that, Sam, I'm not going to introduce you yet, but do you find that when you guys do panels that you see different characteristics in different populations and the way they behave in these kinds of events, or have you noticed?
I never thought about it, so next time I do something, I'm going to keep that in mind.
We can always dissect everything, right?
I'm just happy if someone shows up to anything that I do.
I know.
I call it a win if it's one.
I know. Although I have to say it's getting easier and easier now that we do everything online, right? It's all you have to do is just click a button and you're there. So you don't even have to displace yourself. So you know what? Since we don't have a ton of time, we have about 28 participants who have signed on. I'm hoping during this thing, I'm not going to be looking at our chat, but please don't hesitate, you guys. Anyone who's just joined to let us know who you are, what you're hoping to do here, to learn here, and during the course of this conversation, please make sure that you add any questions you have to the chat, because it's going to be one way for now. So we're gonna jump in right now. Effectively, so you're here for a 1 hour conversation with two special guests, Sam Haffar and Phil Marcotte, to talk about the thorny subject, which is on everyone's mind right now, is, well, can I rethink and adjust my business model to succeed during uncertain times? Because of course these are uncertain times. But I think part of what we're here to do as well is just to say, actually, businesses and startups and any business, they're always subject to changes. There are always external factors that are coming in and impacting on our ability to deliver the value we're hoping to deliver, to create value and to earn money, to have a viable business. So this is not net new. It just happens that in the kingdom of external disruptions, this COVID-19, this coronavirus may be the king. So maybe it's a little bit bigger than usual. I think we're safe to say, but we know how to do this. We've done it before. So we're going to talk about how we manage this. The other thing is we also know that we have good frameworks that we use to do the analysis. What do we do when there's a massive change in the external environment? And it could be competition, and it could be consumer or customer preferences. There are all sorts of things that come into play when you're starting a business. But we have tools to think about these things and how we deal with them. Things like the business model canvas, and that's how we frame out our business strategy. And with this change, what are the risks to that business? What are the elements that you might need to change? We also have tools, things like financial models to say, well, what is the impact from a financial point of view? So we're going to talk about all of those things, because ultimately the key is it's actually not that scary. We can manage this. We can think about this. We know how to think about this. So I'm Jane Somerville. I'm Director of Programs here at District 3. I've been working with and supporting small businesses my whole career as a banker, working in small business, in my own business, at the BDC, and now I'm here. I'm with District 3. For those of you who don't know who District 3 is, we are leading innovation hub based at Concordia University in Montreal. We've worked in the last 5, 6, 7 years. I keep saying 5, but I think it's more like 7 now. We've worked with over 530 startups. A few little known factoids: more than 80% of our founders are immigrant founders, which is really interesting. Did you know that, Sam? And 40% of our founders are women founders, co-founders, which is actually pretty interesting as well. We do a lot on the ecosystem here in Montreal. And all of our programming is pretty much founded on 2 key principles. One is around the notion that it takes a village to raise a startup. We can't do it on our own, and we work closely with other players in the ecosystem. So people like Real Ventures, Sam was with Real Ventures. The other sex, that's the first thing. The second thing is the notion of competency training for entrepreneurship needs to be right-sized, and it needs to be at the right time for the startup. So we really focus on the notion that we want to have, it needs to be, because we want to make the journey easier and less noisy and less stressful. So those are the 2 things we think about. We have 2 key programs. Quickly, one is called the Validation Program, and it is a cohort-based short-term program that helps early-stage entrepreneurs validate their business idea. The other program is called Launch and Grow. It's longer term, up to 2 years, and it supports teams who have validated their business idea, and they have this custom one-on-one, custom support through one-on-one coaching, expert sessions, workshops, global expansion support, and seed fund opportunities. And again, we always connect you to the ecosystem. So in short, our goal here at District 3, our promise is around helping startup entrepreneurs, passionate entrepreneurs with emerging tech and scalable innovations move along that startup journey faster and better. It's hard, we just want to make it easy. Sam, that was long, huh? I want to introduce our guest.
The sleep deprivation.
So Sam, bless him, Sam Haffar is here with us from Real Ventures. Real Ventures is one of Canada's most active early stage VCs and a driving force behind emerging tech ecosystem here in Canada. Sam, bless him for joining us. Sam is my neighbor, but Sam is also a new dad for his 3rd child. A little baby girl was born a couple of weeks ago. And so he is working at home with toddlers and a newborn, very sleep deprived.
Yes, and I will apologize ahead of time in the event that my 2 boys barge in screaming and leaving on the screen. So just giving everyone a heads up. I'm doing my best to hide from them, but they will find me.
It's our new normal, huh, guys? This new normal. So it's all good. We hope we see them. I think, Sam, we're super excited to have you here because I think for any of the startup entrepreneurs in this space, one of the numbers that jumped out at me when I looked at your bio, other than you were in Silicon Valley working for more than a decade and working with multiple startups who had success, that the more than 200 million raised in VC in equity financing. I mean, for any of you who are out there trying to raise money or trying to raise your first 500,000, I mean, someone who's raised over 200 million, that's some good credibility. So super excited to have you here to talk about this rethinking of the business model. Sam works with entrepreneurs at invests in and works with entrepreneurs at Real Ventures. So you can maybe tell us a little bit about that afterwards. And we also have Phil Marcotte, who's with Dr. B. And I think, can we talk about your new name as well?
Yeah. We're rebranding as Lotus Medical.
Excellent. Thank you. So, and actually it was Sam who recommended that we invite Phil here today. So we're thrilled to have you here. Phil, I actually love your background. I was looking at so Phil is a physiotherapist, and then he became a biotechnological engineer. I would have said biotechnology or biotech, anyway, technological engineer. And then he did his MBA. He went off and became, he worked as a consultant with one of the top consulting agencies in the world. So big strategy. And so now he's come back and now he's working in a startup. He's launched his own startup. So super exciting story. Looking forward to hearing more about how you're managing the changes that are happening right now. So did you guys want to add anything to my intros before I go on to explain the structure of the event?
Oh, it's great. Thank you, Jane. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jane.
Okay, cool.
In spite of how great I look right now.
I love it. I love the comfy chair. So for this event, everyone, I'm the moderator for the event. Hopefully you'll hear far less of me moving forward and more from the panelists or from our guests in this conversation. It's going to be one way. The three of us are going to be talking, and then you guys on the other side are able to send in your questions as we start this conversation. We'll have about a 30-minute conversation, and then we'll move into about 30 minutes of discussion of Q&A via chat. So don't forget to send in your questions, comments, whatever. So why don't we get going? And Sam, maybe you can. We'll start having the conversation with you. So, how many of the startups in your portfolio right now have been majorly affected? We had a little conversation earlier about this notion of rethinking your business model is really about looking at that business model canvas and pivoting. And I use the word pivot, and you're like, whoa, what do you mean by pivot? That's a big word. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about that and talk about the notion of pivot versus others and how your teams are affected.
Sure. So, how many companies are highly impacting our portfolio? I think that's a TBD because, things are changing by the minute right now. I think a lot of the companies that initially our assessments and their assessments was there'd be minimal to moderate impact is starting to creep up because of various factors. However, I would say probably, close to 5 or 6 out of 60 active investments. So it's not too bad in terms of high impact. I would say a lot of companies fall in the medium impact.
Okay.
And then I would say, the rest is low impact. But everybody is being impacted. Everybody is, especially companies that are customer facing with, whether it's consumers or brands, any e-commerce or retail business. But we're starting to see the trickle effect on the economic recession impacting, really solid enterprise software companies. Sales cycles are completely put at a halt. Buyers aren't renewing their contracts right now. So I would say it's still early, but I think unless you're like in education technology that's delivering, one-to-many student learning services, unless you're in, insulated space like, healthcare IT, there's probably, 5 or 10 industries you can count out of the hundreds that are less impacted by this. But, certainly, we're seeing an incredible amount of empathy and consciousness from our founders and how they're handling the situation and how they're doing everything within their means to at least create a path forward for their company and for their teams. But to answer your question, it's impacting everyone.
Right.
And I think your second question.
As I got to pivot, we'll come back to the pivot. Oh, sorry, I missed you. Go ahead.
Your second question, if you could just remind me what it was.
It was about the notion of pivot, and you kind
yes.
Yeah, and you kind of jumped into it.
Yeah.
We talked about this notion of you thought it was going to be minimal to average, and then now you're seeing it's creeping up with different because of different factors. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about what those factors are.
Yeah, the unemployment rate is increasing by the week right now, and so whether it's we have companies. So Real Ventures, we're not a specific industry type investor. We invest across the board.
Yeah.
As long as technology is core to the business in some way. So we have investments like a jewelry brand called Majuri. That's a vertically integrated online jewelry brand. 800,000 followers on Instagram. One of the fastest growing consumer brands in North America. And then we've got really hard deep tech companies like Tenstorrent that's building an AI computing chip. So we don't invest in any specific vertical, and we have a really broad set of investments. And what's happening, I think, week by week, what we're seeing play out is the companies that are in the middle to low impact are starting to see their segments of the market change behavior, meaning their customer segments of the market change behavior. And so, what we're seeing as a whole is whether it's a large scale enterprise, medium-sized enterprise, consumer as the decision maker and the purchaser or buyer, everybody is carefully and meticulously evaluating how and where they're going to spend their money based off of survival instincts.
Right.
You saw what happened with toilet paper.
Yeah.
Although I find it quite confounding, to be honest with you. I mean, we're a family of 5, and we use a normal to moderate consumption of toilet paper, but fear is irrational, and most of the time it can be very rational. Sometimes if you're swimming in open water and that you see a school of sharks swimming around you, you should be fearful.
Right.
But you go to a Costco and you see a lot of irrational, fear-driven behavior. So I would say all customer segments across the board are, under some degree or level of fear, which is impacting customer segments of all companies. And so, again, like I said, if you're not in education services, or you're not in medical services, or you're not in, the grocery industry, or, things that are non-discretionary must-haves, it's very easy for a buyer to say, times are getting tough. Where do we tighten the belt?
Right. So it's really, so I'm going to go back to the second part of my question, which was around when I said, our teams, are you pivoting? Because I think that's an important part about, so you've just been speaking about, if I'm looking back to the business model canvas, your customer segments and the revenue streams, how many of them are buying. So that's like really impacting on the viability of the business, because it's not necessarily that people are buying, the way they're buying is different. It's just they're doing less of it. And so you've got that balance between revenues and then the expenses. So when you're talking about a pivot though, because when we were talking about rethinking a business model, you're thinking about, well, I've got these 9 blocks on my business model canvas, this story, this puzzle that together is going to deliver that value that I believe and deliver on those objectives. If you change any piece of that puzzle, it can have an impact on the overall viability, desirability, feasibility of that model. But when I use the word pivot, you went, oh, pivot. So tell me a little bit more about what you mean by pivot.
Yeah, so I'll go with my first company. It's called Chegg. It's less known in Canada. It's very well known in the US. Actually, it's becoming well known in Canada now after 10 years. But, Chegg, we started out as a university marketplace, a classifieds business for university students. We raised venture capital. And it didn't work out the way we planned, and we burned through a couple $1 million, and we just tried completely different ideas with completely different value propositions.
Okay.
And we finally landed on textbook rentals, and we got lucky. It was like having lightning in the bottle. We went from 0 to nearly, voluntarily taking no salary and moving into our parents' basement to, doing $5 million US revenue in 2 months, to 25 million in the second year, to 50 million in the third year, to 75 million in the fourth year. Today, it's a publicly traded company with 3,000 employees. Wow. So, that was a real pivot, and in fact, the word pivot actually came from that company. It was Mike Maples, one of our angel investors, who then now has a venture firm called Floodgate. He invested in Twitter, Lyft. He's a high-profile investor. He used the word pivot in one of these panel discussions, and then bloggers actually wrote about the term pivot. It became mainstream culture.
Okay.
But I think what he meant by the word pivot was, what we started out and what our value proposition when we built the business was significantly different than the value proposition of the business that was successful. So that's how we define pivot.
Right.
Whereas most companies, so a lot of startups in the very, very early stage, when they're really excited about an idea, they're really hopped up on the ability to have an impact, but they don't necessarily have the level of understanding of the customer and the market and the competitive landscape and the moats and the network effects and the economies of scale and all these sophisticated things that you learn over time.
Right.
They end up pivoting more often than companies that I think are founded by serial entrepreneurs, or companies that have found product market fit at a meaningful high confidence interval. And so what we see in our portfolio, so I write checks between $1 to $3 million. We lead rounds, and typically we're investing in companies that are just napkin ideas sometimes with proven teams, to fully established businesses with 30 people that are generating millions and millions in revenue. And what I think is true for most of our companies, why we have conviction to invest, is because their core value proposition is super strong. And that doesn't mean they don't pivot, but more often than not, they evolve the business,
Right.
which is much more frequent than a pivot.
Right.
In my case. And what that means is, they're either going to accelerate the product roadmap, something that they said that they're going to do in Q4, it becomes now a Q1 priority.
Right.
Q2 priority, it means that they need to identify new features to generate more income for the business. It doesn't mean they're going to change the core value proposition, but it means they're going to shuffle the deck around a bit more.
Right.
And they're going to try to optimize things that make more sense given the current situation. I would say 90% of our portfolio right now is in the reconfiguration of the business versus pivot.
It's super interesting. So two things. One, now we actually have the pure definition of pivot. So now we can stop arguing about what really it means in the context of startup land. Thank you for that.
I will tell you, if there's time, I don't want to hog the airspace.
No, don't worry, Phil. We're going to get to you. Don't go to sleep.
So Jane made a big mistake by inviting me to speak, Phil. I'm sorry.
That's cool.
No one ever asked me to talk, and when they do, I won't stop. I made an investment about 2 years ago in a company called Kite, based out of Waterloo. The founder sold his last company to NetSuite. It was called Tribe HR. And the pitch was, right now, there's too much tribal knowledge in businesses. You look from one department to the next, or you look within an existing department. If it's a large department, how often is information redundant and exists but isn't being shared?
Uh-huh.
And so they said, well, we could take really complex machine learning algorithms and take all of this metadata and all of this corporate data, and we can turn it into common knowledge. And we're going to start with sales teams because there's a huge epidemic in sales teams. You've got SDRs, BDRs, account executives, VPs, sales analysts, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, and information.
This amazing machine.
Yeah.
And it plugged into Slack, and anyone could ask a question. And if it exists in the corporate knowledge or in the tribal knowledge from peers, it will automatically give you a contextual answer to your question. Super cool software. It worked really, really well. Didn't take off. We spent 1.5 years doing that, and we did get some customers. We got some enterprise customers, but the average contract value wasn't that meaningful. But what we learned, like what I'm trying to go with this long story, is that if you have an open mind and an open heart and you're willing to listen, you will find opportunities that are greater than what you ever imagined. And so what ended up happening was, who was buying our software? They were sales consultants. And there were sales consultants that were getting hired by small to medium-sized enterprises to train their sales staff on how to be great salespeople. And they were using this knowledge system that we built to implement into their customers. And what we learned by just observing who our buyer was is that there was highly fragmented market of sales consultants and sales training companies, and there was no winner. There was no lion's share winner. There was no whale in the market. And all of them were using this for teaching salespeople how to sell, that weren't scalable, that had no network effects, that didn't have economies of scale, that were expensive and time consuming. And we say, okay, well, if our core value proposition is to take dark knowledge and turn it into common knowledge, well, maybe we just need to completely repoint the arrow and just train a workforce ourselves, because that seems to be the bigger issue. That was a genuine pivot.
Yeah.
And so 4 months ago, we launched a product called Uvaro, which is a sales accelerator. We take people that are business professionals, just graduate from university, and want to get into software sales, but don't have the credentials or experience. So we put them through a 12-week virtual accelerator program and train them on how to be sales professionals. And at the end of that program, they get placed into companies, and it's been a massive success.
So interesting.
So really, I would say, if, when we talk about pivoting, it happens, right? I've lived it at Chegg. I lived it through Uvaro. But to me, the word pivot is used too casually. And what I consider to be real pivots is insight-driven decision-making. Rarely do pivots work if you're just coming up with a brand new idea that came out of left field.
Right.
You start with this dating app and you go, okay, maybe we need to get into enterprise software for warehouse inventory management.
Right.
Usual successful pivots emanate from some sort of insight through experience and pain that you've
Right.
felt,
Yeah.
Because what you were doing wasn't working, but you're willing to listen.
Yeah. So two important points I'm hearing. Well, first of all, you're cutting really through the noise. This notion of pivot is really around that notion. You said the value proposition. And we all know in the business model, you've got your customer segment and you've got the value proposition. And the two of those together, we play one. We use the value proposition canvas. By the way, if you're interested in knowing more about that, anyone on the line, you can go to the D3 Startup Library. We'll put it on the chat channel to learn a little bit about what that means. But it's that connection between the customer segment, the problem they have, and how you're delivering the solution on it. So it's really, that's the major piece for a pivot. And then the other important point I think you brought up was this notion of being data-driven, that it actually has to be an informed decision, not just a whim. Whims are interesting. They're maybe not strategic,
Yes.
though they're maybe
to add to that,
opportunistic.
at Chegg, we didn't just say, oh, the classifieds marketplace isn't working. We did do random pivots, I guess you could say, into completely, unrelated ideas that all failed. The one that was successful is when we went back and looked at our data set in Chegg, we went to Google Analytics, we looked at what categories were the most successful on our website.
Right.
And we started looking at the behavioral attributes of those categories. The number one category was textbook sharing and textbook exchange.
Oh, yeah.
We just thought, it's an analog. Renting textbooks is an analog of sharing and exchanging textbooks,
Right.
but it's just a business model that no one's done before online. And those are businesses that I love. I love obvious ideas that require some degree of insights to make those hard decisions.
Right. Right. Super interesting. Sam, this is good. We could actually go on and on, I think. But I think it's time maybe we should bring Phil into the conversation.
So shut up, Sam. I got it.
Okay. But Sam, you don't have to be totally quiet. You can ask a few questions. Just let me throw one or two in first, okay? So Phil, what's interesting is when I said to Sam, we want to talk about this rethinking of the business model and really like dig into how are people doing it, how might you manage it, do we have the tools to do it? And I said, can you invite a startup who is facing or has faced this this notion of pivoting or rethinking of the business model recently? And so he immediately said, we need to bring in Phil. But what I found was super curious was your pivot actually happened before the big crisis. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about what actually just that quick description of what the business is, your elevator pitch, and then describe about that pivot.
Yeah, thanks.
What prompted it actually?
Yeah, so essentially, our overall mission hasn't changed. So we're in healthcare. Our objective is to build an alternative healthcare system in Canada based on user experience and technology. And it's a challenging mandate, but it's one that can be super impactful, across the nation. And the initial idea was to approach this from a software and analytics point of view. When I was at McKinsey, you talked a little bit about it. What I did was I was leading AI and advanced analytics transformations in big corporations. And so when we saw that, doctors were doing a bunch of things, among other things, billing by themselves, we were like, oh, well, we're going to automate that. We're going to build a software to do that. We're going to collect the data, and then we're going to be able to operate better than other people. And so I liked Sam's point earlier about if it's a true pivot versus an evolution of the model. In our case, it's probably more an evolution of the model because we realized like our game plan was to go into the software, then the analytics, then the operations. And we pivoted to go straight to the operations. So right now what we're doing is we're building and operating tech-enabled medical clinics, which is extremely relevant in the current context. Yeah. And we're using advanced analytics and data generated from the clinic to optimize its operations. Okay, interesting. And then that evolution, which is effectively a change in your value proposition, because it's actually a subset of your original idea. Yep, exactly. Which I'm guessing. And how did what prompted that reductionism in your business model? It's actually an expansion. So the billing, for example, the billing solution is still included in the solution, but the reality is we were going at it a little bit, bootstrapping, leaner, smaller team, software as a service based. And then when we met Sam and we were able to, build the idea around actually operating the brick and mortar clinic, which is much more cash intensive than having a software as a service, then that's what, accelerated and made us pivot to the final phase of our corporation.
Okay. And so your customer segment is the same customer segment?
Yep.
Okay. And how did Sam get involved in, was he involved in helping you evolve the business model, or was it driven by customer interviews, or what was because typically in startup land, it's, you do those 100 interviews to avoid your 60, the false positive. So what was there a moment in time? Was there a specific pain? What was it that prompted that?
Well, actually it was when Sam and I met, it was funny because I had prepared like this whole consultant deck about what we were going to do in phase 1 and 2 and 3, and like super structured, which we never looked at. And then we just interacted, and we got to the root of the problem, which in our mind is the experience in the system, which it is not being addressed, and the efficiency and the tools. And then we actually had workshops, I think like almost a dozen weeks in a row together, like rethinking different aspects of it and like really crafting this new business model. And then when we got funded, then we just went for it.
Okay, and so you were recrafting the framing of the business with Real?
Yeah.
Okay, before the funding.
With my co-founder and Sam and Real, and we got like a bunch of external experts that got in, that gave input, super good input, that really made us like tailor exactly the idea we were doing, because we were addressing a fundamental problem that is rampant across the system. And I think that Sam had kind of like really liked the idea of the problem we were going to solve, and then we just got together and we just cracked it.
I love it. So this is an interesting, I didn't think that Real Ventures did a lot of like pre-work. I thought the due diligence happened, the money came, and then the work happened. So this is an interesting model you guys offer.
Well, I wouldn't say it's something that we do regularly. I would say it's something that I love doing because of my background. And, I think we invest in talent first.
Yeah.
We invest in talent with massive potential.
Yeah.
And then vision, mission, value proposition, opportunity. And I think this was a case where we saw the vision, mission, opportunity in the future, and we saw the talent today. And it just made sense to work together on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've said that a couple of times now, is this notion of we invest in talent, which is a really important point. This notion of you take passionate entrepreneurs who are credible, legitimate in the space that they happen to be in. It's not necessarily the idea that's going to be the winner. It's the people who bring that idea, execute on that idea, or are able to transform that idea into something else. So super important point. So Phil, let's go back to you. So you got your money from Real in January. So you're on track, February, so you're on track, the world is your oyster, you've got that initial investor, and then the world falls apart. So what happens then? Tell us about how you guys have responded to this change, this crisis. What did you guys have to do?
Yeah, well, so, like everyone, we kind of got, a little bit surprised by it. We, from overnight, we were virtual. We had, our customer base is doctors. Essentially, the client who purchases the product is the doctor. So overnight, most of our access to doctors kind of dried up because they're all on the front line. And then, everything kind of changed overnight. And it is a tragedy on the global scale, on the human scale. But if you just look at it only from the lens of our company, it's not necessarily a crisis that's net negative. There are challenges that we're facing, such as now we got to hire a team virtually, which I hate. I want to meet people in person. And our customers are harder to reach because they're all panicking on the front line. But on the other side, you know, it's making some very, very interesting opportunities, such as, you know, we hadn't signed any leases yet. We're a very real estate intensive brick and mortar company. We were at the peak of the real estate market. Like, the prices were completely ballooning before this. And now we're thinking, well, you know what, if we just hold off a little bit and our burn rate is crazy low, so we can actually save a lot of money on everything that we'll need to spend. And, you know, hiring a lot of people, talented people are afraid of losing their jobs. So they're, you know, they may join us, you know, more readily. So for us, it's just, we kind of took everything virtual. We kind of put off making any long-term commitments until we kind of see what the market is going to look like. But we don't see this as something that's, you know, net negative at all.
Super interesting.
From the company point of view, like from the human point of view, very, very tragic.
Phil, thank you for underlining that. I'm underlining that. I know it is tragic, but I think the important point, we're here to talk about how startups manage or respond to changes in the market. And this is a terrifying and terrible moment. And you know, we're talking about now the post-colonial era. You know, what was before will never be again. It's such a huge shift for all of us across the world. But at the same time, from a startup point of view, we have the tools and we have the frameworks for thinking about, wait, what does this mean to me? And so there are positives. In this case, you didn't have to necessarily rethink your business model. You did. You took that business model, you went back and said, are there risks? Where are the changes? And in fact, if you do that classic SWOT, you saw that in fact there were opportunities, and it was around the some of the core activities or resources you need for your business, which is in the real estate, which affects your cost structure of your business proposition, which is really interesting. I think one of the other things you talked to me a little bit about when we were just getting organized to talk is how you've actually, it's not so much a pivot for you, but it's implemented, or it's caused these operational changes. So things like you just mentioned HR. How do you hire anyway? How do you bring a team together when you've never been able to meet them face to face? You also talked about some of the new technologies or new tools you're using that you've implemented within your group. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you're using technology. I think you talked about Miro, for example.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm like the biggest fan of Miro now, because so one of the so one thing funny story about me, I always draw like on whiteboards and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, like when we were bootstrapping, we had rented this apartment in Laval when it was just my co-founder and I, and we literally painted all the walls with, you know, the whiteboard paint. And then
District 3 is covered in those walls.
I would love it. So like 24 hours later, you know, after we've painted everything and we've moved in, the walls are covered in drawing. And I'm like, oh man, this is so cool. Like, we've just been here for like a day and it looks like a startup, you know? And he goes, I haven't written on the wall yet. So apparently I'm just this madman who goes around and writes on walls as I talk. Anyway, so Miro is like this virtual whiteboard that you can collaborate with. And now all our staff meetings, all the brainstorming sessions that we always have a Google Hangout link and a Miro whiteboard link. So we can actually, it's kind of like having the entire team around the whiteboard in reality, but it's virtual.
Okay, very cool. I have one of my colleagues has been telling me about Miro for a while, and he's going to be super excited to have us talking about Miro. So way to go, Wallace. Apparently there, he just raised his hand. He's very excited by that. I brought it up on purpose. Gina, the last question I want to have before we go to the chat questions are really simply, you know, you're talking about at this point in time, it doesn't, this big external change has not had a major impact on your business. So from your point of view, if you were a year out from now, where you expect you're going to be, how do you think this might have affected your business differently, this crisis and your prospects?
Do you mean like, how do I think it's going to impact where I'll be in a year? Or do
No,
you mean if I were a year out, how it would have been?
Yeah, if today you were a year out, what would be your,
If we were a year out, I think we would have every investor in the world throwing money at us right now.
Nice. Okay, so tell me a little bit about that, because I think really my point is, I think for all of us, the stage of your business has a big impact on whether this external event is a plus or a minus, and how much of a plus or minus it is. So
yeah, but I think also in terms of what your business is, it's also going to be a huge factor, obviously. If you look at us, like just us, a year out, what that would look like. We operate medical clinics, so the reality is those clinics would still be open right now. The only thing that would be different is HQ would be closed and it would be virtual like it is now. For us, HQ is mostly like product, engineering, and HR and stuff like that. So for us, you can virtualize that. The only real thing that would be impacted is, since we're opening a network of clinics, and our ability to increase revenue is directly linked to the number of clinics that we open, and we're facing that right now. The biggest delays that we're facing is we can't physically go visit new spaces to lease. So
right.
if we can't get any leases, we can't do any construction, we can't open clinics, we can't increase the number of clients that we have. So that's the limiting factor. But other than that, we'd still be operational.
Interesting. So even if the clinics were empty, because the clinics are in-person clinics, correct?
Yeah, it depends which clinic. But for example, what we want to be doing is walk-ins a lot, which would still be operating.
Okay, so the walk-ins would still be, so you might even be turned into testing centers. So super interesting. Sam, did you want to say something before I jump over to questions?
No, I think Philippe covered it.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just looking at the time. I'm being mindful. I think it might be interesting to open up the floor now to some questions from the audience. So I'm just waiting to get my questions from Ghislaine. Are we ready to go? Okay, so I'm having a bit of a technical moment right now. So a technical issue. So I'm gonna just keep talking. So Sam, do you have another example of a COVID specific response to a rethink of a business model? And can you speak to that in the real portfolio without giving away too many details?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I led the investment for real in a company called Rent-A-Run. And Rent-A-Run was just absolutely thriving prior to, March 13th, when, federal and provincial guidance was, work from home, close your stores. So Rent-A-Run's an on-demand construction material delivery company. Think of it as like a virtual Home Depot.
Fantastic.
And just doing phenomenally well. And they literally had to close their 3 markets. They're in Montreal, Austin area. And there's a company that had raised, like $17 million Series A 4 months earlier. And so it was, burning not a huge burn rate, but for the size, being 150 employees, but a meaningful burn rate. And when you close operations like that, you have to make tough decisions, and the focus is really less. So I would say that what we're not talking about is successful leadership. To me, that's the name of the game is successful leadership. It's not about, is there going to be an economic recession? Is the world going to crumble? It's not about things that you can't control, because there's a million things you can't control. It's about having what I call a cautiously optimistic, glass half full mindset. And so, a company like Rent-A-Run is saying, okay, with every bad, there's a good. And the good is, we have time to double down and focus on our product. And the vision of that company wasn't just to be a virtual Home Depot. It was to digitize the construction industry from A to Z, starting with material delivery. And so it's really given us the opportunity to accelerate our product roadmap. Because while you are shutting down, really key markets and operations, which it negatively net impacts the revenue of the business, you are able to shift your focus as a CEO and a management team onto those things that were in the roadmap, but you weren't going to get to them 2 quarters from now, that were critical to the business and the long-term success of it. So what we're seeing right now is we're seeing an acceleration of the long-term roadmap, which is awesome, because in a perfect world, you'll be able to do both. You'll be able to generate revenue and build future product, but that doesn't happen most of the time because you have limited time and resources. And the other thing that we're seeing is great entrepreneurs are creative. And they're not just creative in the sense of, oh, what can we do? They're creative in the sense of they're able to be, in the conscious leadership sense, they're able to be aware of their own emotions. And so a lot of times people freak out, like me, that shark in water, swimming in open waters with sharks analogy, people freak out. And once you panic, you actually create more waves and the sharks come and they start smelling you. And I think really creative entrepreneurs identify fear quickly. And because they identify it, they can say to themselves in a kind of a schizophrenic-like conversation, hey, I'm afraid of this. I get it. I don't have to be in the conversation of being afraid to make good decisions. Let's put the fear aside and let's figure out what the good decisions look like. And, time will be on your side. And if you plan properly and you make adjustments accordingly and you stretch your runway and you tighten the belt and you look at which line items on the P&L that you can reduce, you will outlast a bear market. And companies that outlast a bear market, that focus on innovation, guess what happens to them? They become big companies. They become the most successful companies. You look at the history of Silicon Valley, and some of the greatest companies in the history of Silicon Valley, were a couple years old in the middle of a crisis. Chegg started in 2008. I don't know if you remember.
Yes.
So I've lived through this storm, and my perspective is you have to be diligent, but you just have to relax and chill.
Right.
And just I don't go on LinkedIn and read all those, self-serving posts about, how do you manage business through crisis and how do you do this and how do you do that and do this and don't do that. I tell founders, make sure that your mental well-being is taken care of first and foremost. Like you're mentally healthy, because the amount of stress and burden of running out of money in a good economy for a startup is so intense. But the amount of stress and burden of accelerating your burn to run out of money, 100% faster than you anticipated is more than 3 times the mental stress.
Right.
Take care of yourself, take care of your family, and that gives you time to take care of your business and to make rational decisions and focus on the future if you can't control today.
Right.
And that's it.
Right. It's interesting. Your messaging is a lot around rationality, around informed thinking, around calm. I really like the analogy around like the shark in the water and the frenzy. And I think this is part of why we're actually starting this series of conversations, and this is our like start of our series of conversations with people in the industry. The idea that it's actually okay. Like there are always going to be external changes. There are always going to be, there could be internal, your best programmer, your CMO can't come into the office. That's one of the key resources in the organization. But at the same time, we have the frameworks for thinking about this. And it actually is not that complicated. First of all, there are no right answers. They are just better answers. It's like raising a child, right? It's a complex problem we're trying to solve, and what's good for one kid one day is bad for them the next day, and it's bad for their brother or sister the same day. So it's always it's patterns and frameworks for thinking that allow us to.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, one of my investments is a company called Sonder, and they had 1,200 employees, and it was publicly announced. It came out in the news. They let go a third of their staff, or 30% of their staff. Look, you still have to make tough decisions. You still have to do the hard work. It's still going to be painful, but it's doable.
Right, and they're informed decisions. That
Exactly.
Comment about you look at your cash flow and you figure out, what do you need to do to extend that runway, and and there are expenses you can cut out. And it's one of the panels we had last week was just around that. How do you think about your cash flow moving forward, and your burn rate, and so you can do that in a methodical way. I mean, Phil, what have you guys done with respect to, like, what are the tools you've leaned in on in order to manage your way through this? Because I think it's easy to say we're managing, we're thinking, but actually there's some practical stuff you can do. And that's why I keep coming back to tools, frameworks, blah, blah, because they're practical. Wait, I can pull out my business model canvas and say, wait a second, which is the area, circle the area that's the most risky, the most worrying. Phil,
you want me to show the business model canvas that I did, right?
Man. So you used it.
But we actually did use it, and we looked at this, and it made us look at some of the risks that we were in, but also, for example, some of our key partners. We have a key partner which we haven't signed the contract yet, but we were in the process of negotiating, who's also a startup, and which we had some covenants added to the contract to make sure that if they go under, they won't be bringing us with them. So so migration clauses and the ability for us to take over their payroll if for their consultants if there's anything. But yeah, so there's tools such as the business model canvas, and there's some actual concrete measures that we've put in place as well to mitigate the risk of the crisis.
And what are you using, Sam, with your teams to make sure that they're on track and to help them think better in a more logical, informed way?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of, so we have our own frameworks and processes. We start with the financial model. And it's not just a regular financial model, it's an assumptions-driven financial model. What are assumptions? If you're an enterprise software company, let me just go with a basic version. Real Series B, Series C, enterprise software company assumption-driven financial models are much more complex than this, but I'll give you a very simple example. What do you think your annual contract value is if you don't have 12 months of operating experience? We think it's going to be $5,000 ACV. Okay, let's go back to that. If you think it's going to be $5,000 in your budget, you think you're going to have $1 million in annual recurring revenue. Well, the market, 50% of the market's not buying software now. So if you thought you were going to get to 1,000 customers this year, you're probably going to get to 500. And maybe their budget's also going to be cut and their expectations on pricing are going to be cut. So now you need to change that 5,000 ACV to 2,500 ACV, which means you're going to half your annual recurring revenue.
Right.
It's not just about financial budgeting. It's about what assumptions drive your business model.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, if it's going from $1 million to $500,000 because of this crisis, let's look in your financial model. You have an HR tab. Click on that. Okay, you assume you're going to hire 6 salespeople, 3 SDRs, 2 AEs. Well, now we need to fix that, right?
Right.
And then, we need to preserve cash. We don't need 12 months runway. We need 18 months runway, because even when the economy starts getting better, there's going to be a slow ramp-up period.
Right.
So let's look back at what our spend algorithm looked like, and now we need to move that 6 months out.
Right.
So we're doing a ton of that, and it's not a business school type case study. It's just common sense, really.
Yeah.
It's the same thing I tell companies that are flush with cash after a round of financing. They tell me, okay, we're going to hire a CTO, we're going to hire a VP of sales. Here, we're going to pay them this much, and I'm like, that's awesome. But have you ever hired a VP of sales before? No. So in your assumptions-driven model, you said you're going to find one and hire them in 3 months. Not going to happen.
Right.
Unless you want B school players. Right? It's going to take you 6 months. So if that VP of sales is going to be responsible for generating 25% of your target this year, you better change your annual target, or you better increase the time it takes to hire a VP of sales. They don't get that because they've never done it before.
Right.
And so my job is to not force it, but to help educate them to understand that these simulations, you don't have to be right. It doesn't have to be accurate, but you have to constantly get better at it. Because if you go from 0 to 100 million and you make a calculation error of 10%, that's $10 million. Right. And if you budget that $10 million and you weren't able to generate the revenue that's made that $10 million efficient, now you're net negative. And most startups are burning money and have negative EBITDA for the first 3.5 to 5 years. is going to be increasing by a exponential factor versus incremental factor. So whether you're unless you're a 2-person startup on a ramen noodle budget that has no mortgage and no risk and no dependence, and you could survive like cockroaches, and I was one of them, right? Which is great. Those are the best times of your life. You have to be extremely diligent on how you plan the business.
Right, and very thoughtful. It's interesting. I'm coaching a team at District 3 right now, who's we've been looking at exactly those kinds of assumptions. And one of the assumptions was around retention rate for customers. We've got this pile of customers already. We're pretty sure we're gonna keep all of them. I'm like, maybe we're gonna readjust that assumption. What happens if? And so this notion of scenarios. Okay, let's say you do. What's your runway on this? What happens if you only keep 80%, 50%? 20 and so that was a super interesting conversation.
Yeah, and what I tell my companies is that the budget and financial model isn't there to please me as your board member. It's basically your business product roadmap.
Right.
If you're a tech company and all you do is write code and push features out, that's only as good as how you think cohesively about the business. And businesses are very simple. How much money do you need and how much money will you get? And if you don't have that plan to understand what adjustments and what optimizations you need to make, I can guarantee you, which is 95% of startups, you will run out of money and nobody will want to support you in the future. So it's so prudent that you take this seriously, even if you're tiny, because this is hygiene and this is what will ensure your company has the greatest chances of success for the long run. And it's like I kind of like a Navy SEALs instructor. I teach entrepreneurs from day one when I write a check and they're first-time entrepreneurs, let's prepare for board meetings even though it's the 3 of us. I know it doesn't make sense, but we gotta get in our shape together.
It's right? Interesting. Phil, do you feel that message passed to you? Are you like prepared to present to a board every time you sit down?
Well, I think in my case, I was actually thinking about it before Sam brought it up. We've already had the discussion with the lawyers to have the lawyers present and like do this official, because what we wanted to do is make sure once we get to Series A, the investors are going to look at this and they're going to go, oh wow, these guys are really disciplined and they've done this. But there's no doubt in my mind that had I not been proactive, Sam would have brought me in the right way.
Very good. We haven't had a lot of questions, so I guess you guys have just been hitting all of the questions before they came up. There is one from Raphael to everyone saying, making changes to your business model is a long-term decision. With things changing almost daily and without knowing when things will pick up again, how do you make these kinds of decisions right now? Who wants to take a crack at that one?
Phil, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I agree. It's a long-term decision. I think that like Sam said, like this is a situation that's evolving almost daily. So like what we've decided to do is we're kind of reassessing everything every 30 days, just to make sure how is the ground shifting around us. In the long-term decisions, for us, it's mostly about, decreasing long-term commitments without, heavily impacting, when we'll get products out and getting input from customers. So, I agree with the question in terms of, if you were to pivot and like change your business model completely, the couple of businesses that I'm in touch with, the other startups, no one seems to be like doing major long-term changes like across the board in terms of where they're going. It's more in terms of preserving the cash flow to make sure that you'll have long-term viability. What do you think, Sam?
That's a great explanation. I guess maybe we'll try to stimulate more questions from the group. I'll try to spice things up a bit. My kids asked me to make them chocolate chip cookies last week. And I'm a horrible baker. I'm a good cook. So if any of you want to come over, I'm happy to cook for you. I'm a good cook.
I'm coming. You know that.
I can vouch for that.
And so I went on YouTube and I watched this video, and it was basically someone that did a data-driven approach to how to make the perfect batch of chocolate chip cookies. And if you read like any cookbook, it's so precise, 2 teaspoons of baking soda, room temperature butter. And whoever made this video is like, I'm going to just completely go against every single traditional conventional norm of how to make chocolate chip cookies. So I'm going to start with a traditional method, and I'm going to retest that against different types of flours, different types of baking sodas, different types of, melted butter versus room temperature butter versus
intense.
And it was intense, right? But that's really a perfect analogy of how you should be thinking, right? You're going to have a group of people saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? And then, you're going to have your own instincts and your own assumptions and your own ideas and your own hypothesis. So the way I'll break it down is, in this example, the traditional chocolate chip method that was probably Julia Child's recipe from 1945 that everyone uses, for those of you who know who she is, that is your base model. That's your budget.
Right.
Okay? That doesn't change ever. No matter how wrong you are, you don't touch it. Okay? You leave those cookies in the oven for 15 minutes at 350 degrees and you don't open that door. All right? And then you have what's called a reforecast or a forecast. And forecasts constantly change. And to go into what Philippe said, is your job is to take information that becomes factual as a result of testing, and then re-input those facts into your forecast to get better at reforecasting. And that might happen if you're really lucky and you have a lot of data and you have a lot of users, you could do that in a 7-day interval. If you don't, it might take you a 30 or 60 or 90-day interval. And most companies do it in 45-day intervals at this stage. Right. So what you do is, like this chocolate chip experiment, you have your base, you have your traditional, the Cadillac of chocolate chip cookies. You don't touch it, but you got to constantly experiment. You got to try mixing all-purpose flour with baking flour versus with, gluten-free flour, whatever, and trying to just slowly but chip away from assumptive-based modeling to factual-based modeling, and not trying to chug it, but collect these bite-sized pieces of facts along the way, whether it's on a weekly interval, a monthly interval, a 45-day interval, a quarterly interval, and just get better and better at it and make decisions faster as you collect those data and you measure it against your budget. And it's okay to laugh at yourself and say, we were so off, but now our own proprietary recipe is way better than Julia Child's. She was completely wrong. You don't need to have room temperature butter to make the perfect batch. You can have melted butter and it tastes even better. So that's the mindset here.
Yeah. I like I like that iterative approach, and that notion is that you don't get smarter in a day just because. You don't wake up tomorrow with the answer. In fact, there's never any real right answer. They're just better answers. And in fact, back to that question, actually, that's life. Everything is changing every day, all the time. It is true that right now, in the land of COVID, it's even more disruptive because it's just so different. But before COVID, it was always like that anyway. And so you have to have that mindset, which is about learning and growing every day and being agile and ready to, first of all, you said a comment about this notion of you can do a 7-day data collection or 30-day. So it's this notion of sprints and continual collecting of data. So having the mechanisms to be able to then land those insights, land that data.
Yeah, and some of the data collection will be minor and incremental, and some of them will be holy shit moments. Like the government's telling you, close your store. That's a holy shit moment, right? Exactly. And holy shit moment, now all of a sudden your budget completely changes, but that's okay, right? Because now we can go back to our forecast and we can look at what levers we can play with, and we'll take a deep breath and we'll figure out how to navigate this complex environment the best that we can, understanding not everything's in our control, but what is in our control we can focus on, and what's not is a waste of expended energy, right? Yeah. And the less time you putting yourself in the drama triangle of victim, hero, and villain, right? I'm a victim. Why did this happen to me? I've waiting my whole life to start this company, and now all of a sudden the world falls apart and, it craps its pants, right? To the hero, like, oh, I'm going to turn this around by pivoting, right? To the villain, like, I'm just going to get rid of everybody. I don't need anybody, screw that. No, you have to get out of that drama triangle and you just have to be pragmatic and you have to be iterative about it.
Yeah. Do you find, I'm going to ask Phil, so do you often get in the drama triangle, and which role do you play?
I mean, I don't feel like I don't think we're really in the drama triangle for us at this point. You know, for us, we're still hiring the team, so you know, we're not in the villainous mindset of laying off people, or the hero track, or the victim for that matter.
Right.
We're not in drama mode for us. We're very calm-headed.
My point, Phil is definitely not in there. My point is to those that are listening, don't insert yourself in there.
Exactly.
in any of the axes of it.
Phil, that was a trick question, actually.
Yeah, I saw it. That's cool.
It was good, but I actually I love that, and I think we're finished with our hour. We're actually 5 minutes over the hour, and I think you guys have covered it so much that people have just been, you know, hopefully just inspired by this conversation overall. I've loved the nuggets that you've given. I think it's a good time to. We've got some hands. Andrea Mendoza is clapping her hands. Thank you, Andrea. But effectively, a few key takeaways from this. I think you close it up really well. This notion that talent is key in successful startups. So the leadership is really important, and protect your mental health, particularly in this time. The change is constant. It doesn't matter whether it's COVID or otherwise. I mean, government could just put a regulation in place which would close down your business as well, or your access to a market. It happens even in the non-COVID times. So in fact, the mindset needs to be aware of what's going on and collect data on a regular basis and have somewhere to land it. Like, for example, in your business model canvas, in your cash flow models, because that data informs your assumptions. So the other part was review those assumptions, because actually those assumptions, we want to get closer to truth rather than assumptions.
Exactly.
Because the assumptions, if you get them wrong, can have a really bad impact on your ability to keep afloat, keep the lights on. And then I think the last part was, Phil, you were talking just about, and keep your eye on the, actually you called it, Sam, you called it hygiene. And I was like, oh, hygiene, it kind of like lived alone. I think you meant financial hygiene, is how I took it. But you actually also brought that up, Phil, and the comment about paying attention to those long-term commitments and preserving that cash flow is a really important mechanism or tool. I wish you could like show your cash flow model right now as your other key.
I use hygiene intentionally because
yeah,
nobody gets excited other than finance people about opening up a financial model, including myself. I don't get excited about looking at startups' financial models. It's just like, you know, I have to brush my teeth. I don't, some people do. I mean, I wish I was one of them that like woke up every day saying, yeah, I get to brush my teeth, but it's so important.
It's so important. Yeah, it's so important. You guys, thank you so much for being here with us. It's such a pleasure. Your insights have been super interesting. I think for the group, hopefully everyone's walking away from here feeling a little bit calmer, a little reassured, and have some actionable insights about how they might rethink their business model and the tools and the frameworks they can use so they can actually move forward and keep going. And the other part is it takes a village, and we really appreciate all of the other players in the ecosystem. So Real Ventures, we're super glad, Sam Haffar, that you could be here with us. Our story is all about startups. So Phil Marcotte, good luck with your name change with this new venture. We'll be following you. And again, we're here to help if we can support you in any way. Guys, do you have any last things you want to say to the audience before we head out?
Thank you so much. Yeah. Stay calm. You can do it. Believe in yourself, and you know, patience and persistence is way more valuable than pure intellect.
Yeah, I agree. And there is going to be an end to the crisis. So it's just about, you know, calmly weathering the storm.
Okay, cool. And to everyone who is here with us today, thanks from D3. We're going to be doing these kinds of talks with other friends from the ecosystem, other startups on a regular bi-weekly basis. We're going to be converting, the timing is going to be at lunchtime, so keep your eyes peeled for the announcement of our next one, which will be 2 weeks from today at noon. So you can eat your sandwich at your desk, at home, or on your comfy chair like Sam, and you can come and just connect with other people in the ecosystem and hopefully get reassured and get re-energized to get back to work, because actually the engine of the Canadian economy is small businesses, so we need to keep us going. So with that, thanks again for everyone, and look forward to seeing you all here again next time.
Thanks to the whole team at D3 for making this happen. You guys that are listening, they did a lot of work. They put a lot of work in this. They prepped us, and it was wonderful, amazing.
Good. Thank you. We're just so glad, and we had some fun, huh?
Yeah.
I've got some new words. And pivot, everyone. We now know the source, the origin of the word pivot. We all need to use it properly now.
Bye, guys.
Take care, everyone. Good night.
Cool. Thanks. Take care.
Oh, and have a nice long weekend, everyone. And be safe, healthy.